Hi guys and welcome to 6++. My name's Lee and today I'm going to be going through another product review. As you may know, we have recently teamed up with UrbanMatz to provide some more characterful and interesting battle boards for our battle reports. And today I'm going to be reviewing one of their pre-painted sets of terrain, which is the City Ruins. Now, full disclosure before I go any further is that we did actually receive these sets at a discounted rate from UrbanMatz. However, we're under no obligation to give a positive review if we don't feel like the product is up to scratch. However, we will be looking at it from a number of different perspectives. So in a minute, it's still all boxed up. I'm going to unbox it. We're going to sort of see how well it's packaged, review the quality, review its suitability for games of Warhammer 40k, which is predominantly what we're playing, cost and general sort of aesthetic on the tabletop as well. So without any further ado, let's open the box. Okay then guys, so what I've ordered is the full City Ruins set. So this is on the website, about €135. Two big boxes, yet to be opened. I've opened one just so I can sort of start to get into it in a second without too much difficulty. Again, speed of shipping, much the same as the mats, sort of 4 or 5 days, came tracked and sort of no hold-ups, nothing with Brexit or anything like that. Delivered two very sturdy boxes. They did have black wrap on it. I've taken that off already. But yeah, feeling sturdy. I haven't actually sort of gone into it myself yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it rolling, unpack it all out onto the table here, and we'll have a look together. So this is the first box then. So firstly, packaged in some polystyrene. And let's put that down here. And then inside, and again I'll lift a couple out and then I'll unpack it all and we can see it together. But what we've got is each individual piece is actually in polystyrene, and I think you can kind of see on the video, if I lift this a little bit, it's packaged in polystyrene sort of shaped for the pieces. That gives me a lot of confidence that what I'm going to open is hopefully not damaged and might even provide a nice useful storage, putting it back into that if I choose to do that anyway. But let's start getting a few pieces out. So each piece also comes individually wrapped in bubble wrap as well, so it just gives it a bit of extra protection. And in fact, bubble wrap and then also a bit of plastic here as well. Maybe a little bit over here on the plastic. I don't know what really what this piece is doing. But as I bring out the first piece, it's got a kind of nice weight to it, like it's not going to sort of drift around the battlefield. Importantly, it's very flat on the bottom, so what I'm hoping not to get any rocky pieces. In terms of the quality of it, I'll give you a close-up in a minute. I think it looks good. It's sort of like hard resin material, feels very sturdy. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and continue and unpack all the pieces out onto the table for you, and then we'll have a look together. Okay guys, so here we have the terrain. I've unboxed it all now, and what you'll see is I've just sort of split it on both tables. What we've got is two half sets, obviously combining into one set. It does work out slightly cheaper if you do that. And also some of the pieces are available to purchase individually if you just feel like you want sort of somewhere between the two, or just something to spice up the battlefield a little bit more. What you get in each set is sort of one very large ruin, two matching corner ruins of sort of a medium size, two smaller ones, and then two, I guess what I would describe as barricades. All of them you can see are painted in the same style, very, very uniform. Not to detract any attention away from the models, but just to make sure you have a functional battlefield around. Again, exactly the same on the two sets. And what I would say is, looking at them and sort of taking a feel of them as I was unboxing it, is it does feel very, very solid. We have used some of the UrbanMatz stuff before in a couple of our battle reports, so you may have seen those already. That's more the industrial set. Obviously we wanted to diversify a little bit for your entertainment to have some City Ruins as well. And I'm really happy with it actually. What I'm going to do in a second is I'm just going to set up the mat as well and sort of see how it functions on that. And we'll just get a feel for the overall aesthetic of the terrain. And then we'll come and we'll talk about sort of how functional sort of we think it might be in games of Warhammer 40,000. Alright guys, so what I've done is I've set up the Badlands mat, also from UrbanMatz. You'll see that in one of our other product reviews. And I've just laid the terrain out on it, and I've kind of done it a little bit symmetrical, just to sort of show how much you actually get in the set, which is actually quite a lot. In terms of having enough, sort of in any deployment zone, I think you would have enough. Obviously, if you want to sort of supplement with anything else, then obviously you can do. But honestly, if you're buying a full set, I think you've got enough to be going on with anyway. Rules-wise, there's standard. Most of the stuff is going to be breachable ruins, so that does give you a fairly limited exposure to the rules that you'll be playing with. But also, being the most common is what you're going to see in tournaments anyway. Maybe not this exact style, usually it's something a little bit cheaper, so MDF or something like that than this. But I really think that it does provide a very nice, effective battlefield. And what I really like about it is how consistent it makes the battlefield look, rather than what I normally have, which is a load of haphazard pieces of terrain that are all painted slightly differently in different styles and to different qualities. So what this does, it really brings that nicely together. To give you a bit of scale, what I would do now is just find a selection of models and just place them on the battlefield as well, just so you can kind of see how tall some of these pieces are, where models are going to fit, where they can stand, where they can't stand. Alright guys, so what I've done is I've just grabbed a selection of models of different sizes to just sort of demonstrate how tall some of these pieces are. Now I'm going to start with Magnus. So Magnus is one of my favourite models in the entire Warhammer range, and yet one of the things I've constantly struggled with is anywhere to actually place him on the battlefield so he doesn't die turn 1 to a bit of fusing. If you go second with 1,000 Suns, it can be an uphill struggle. So looking at these two largest pieces, they were the only ones I'm thinking that maybe Magnus can actually hide behind. And so, for the first time ever, I think I may have found some terrain, and maybe the angle doesn't do it justice there. Magnus is probably a centimetre shorter than the top of the terrain, which is great, and certainly means he can actually gain some obscuring benefit from this ruin, which doesn't happen very often. In terms of the rest of them, obviously he's going to be too big for that, so let's move him aside now. But that is interesting because that's the first time we've ever come across that. What I've got next is just a 1,000 Suns Scarab Occult Terminator, and you can sort of see how he can fit on the shelf there, any of the levels. And this one I picked the tallest one, it has the missile rack on it as well. It's slightly taller than your average infantry anyway. And then similarly, you probably fit a small squad in there, maybe get all 5 in there touching it. And then from the barricades, slightly taller than the barricade, but depending on how you want to play them, should gain some benefit to cover there as well. I've then taken a slightly bigger model, so now I've got my Abaddon. So looking at this, obviously he is infantry, so he could pass through this ruin, but he actually couldn't fit through it, so it's not quite tall enough for him to go through. So if you want to place him inside, that's going to be a challenge. However, if you're looking at the regular ruins, fit comfortably through as well. So very pleased with that. Functionality seems to be good. Last but not least, what I've got is it's random, it was the first vehicle I could find, which is a Sakaran battle tank. Again, what you're going to see is, in terms of these here, for instance, you are going to be able to stay off of it and gain the benefit from obscuring for a piece of that size. Similarly, you could hide behind this one, and obviously those big ones there. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of variety of sizes here that most of your army units should be able to benefit from. However, there is just the point of measuring to see which pieces are actually taller than the 5 inches that is necessary to be obscuring. So, okay, so I have my 5 inches here. Should be easy to measure, right? Okay, so this one here, not obscuring, not taller than 5 inches. So that one there is looking about 3.5 inches at its highest point. Coming on to these ones here, 7 inches. So the medium-sized corner pieces absolutely will be obscuring. But these slightly smaller pieces will not, and obviously it goes without saying that the big ones are over 5 inches in height. as I said, they're all ruins. One of the things that 9th edition brought in that was really good is the obscuring rule for terrain over 5 inches tall. So in a previous edition, I would have looked down through this, and if you were playing bottom line of sight, blocks line of sight, like most people were doing if they were playing ITC and competitive games in 8th edition, then that was fine. However, if you're playing the current edition, where line of sight is always true line of sight, then these ruins are basically porous. There's a lot of ways you could stand in that. Gain the benefit of cover, of course, but you are absolutely going to be taking... you're not going to be out of line of sight. So that is an issue in terms of the actual mechanics of the game. However, seeing as we have obscuring now, obviously, rather than if I take my Terminator here and I place him, that's a bad example because that was not obscuring. If I place him here, obviously he gets the benefit of being far enough behind this more than 5 inches piece of terrain. However, because of there he is in there, because of the fact that it's got so many holes in it, unless you're going to choose to block those up, you're not going to cover when you're within that. So that is an interesting element of the terrain. You do always want a number of line of sight blocking things, and now, like I said, that is sort of covered by having the obscuring. But it's worth noting that there's not much true line of sight blocking in this particular set. What you could do, and what I've been tempted to do, is buy another set and mix and match the two, so you get a bit of the city ruins and then another set that provides a little bit more battlefield diversity, and also gives you a little bit more sort of varied terrain. So you might want some sort of light cover, heavy cover, you might want some forest or something like that as well. So there are things to consider. Generally, however, I think it will absolutely work for games of Warhammer 40,000, and I'm looking forward to trying it out. We're going to come back and have a few more discussion points, and then we'll close out. Alright then guys, so I'm back with my final thoughts on the terrain, and we'll start at the beginning, I guess. So packaging wise, absolutely great. None of the pieces have any damage on them, which comes down to sort of being packaged well. Obviously it had bubble wrap and a layer of plastic and a layer of bubble wrap, polystyrene in there as well. Whether or not that's all needed, I personally think I probably would have been fine without it, but it has made sure that the pieces I've got have come in pristine condition, which is great. In terms of the aesthetics of them, I think they look really good. Don't get me wrong, they're not going to be the showpieces, they're not particularly flashy, but the benefit of that is it doesn't detract anything away from the models themselves, which should really be, in my opinion, the stars of the battlefield. Depending on what kind of mat or surface you're playing on will depend on sort of how much the aesthetic is tied in. With the mats that I've got, these work really, really nicely because they're sort of fit the ruins kind of fit either the cobblestone or they fit the grassy, earthy style of what a ruined city ground would actually look like. So from that point of view, I think they fit in really nicely. Importantly, they also fit in really nicely with each other, so they are really consistent between the pieces. There's sort of no colour variation, no texture variation. So from that perspective, they sort of ties the battlefield together really nicely. From a practicality point of view, again, I've discussed obviously how I feel maybe could benefit from more line of sight blocking pieces to supplement this. Obviously though, with the rules in the current edition of Warhammer, there are ways to get around that, and many of the pieces are obscuring, and you do get a lot in the set. It is absolutely enough to cover a battlefield and to make it look really good as well. The other thing that I wanted to check was to make sure they all sit flat. I don't know why it really bothers me when they rock, when you're trying to place models on it, and then you can't quite balance that, let alone the terrain as well, sort of working against you. But I am happy to report that all the pieces are level, and they sort of sit very nicely against the mat. Speaking of the mat, so they do obviously the mat is not that much friction on the surface, but because the pieces are quite heavy, they're not sort of floating around the board. I don't expect them to move very much. Obviously, if you nudge them with your body or something like that, they will move. But it's not like just placing the model on them and they're going to sort of shift or anything like that you do get sometimes with lighter pieces, particularly things like the plastic craters and stuff like that can just sort of tend to drift a little bit if you're not careful. Whether or not this terrain works for you is going to again come down to your circumstances. So what you've got here is a really good set of terrain that can feasibly be stored quite easily in a plastic box or two, which is what I plan to do. Now that works for me because I don't tend to take my terrain around very often, and if I had to, I typically drive to an event, so I would have the option to just load them into my car. If this is something you're sort of wanting to carry around or regularly take to your gaming club or whatever, it is quite heavy, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because that's sort of the sign of the quality that you're getting. But it's just worth keeping in mind if you're carrying this big set around for a lot of the time, it's going to get quite heavy, and that may or may not work for you. I personally would think it might be a bit too much over time. So coming back then to the cost, so as I've mentioned, the set, the full set this is about €135, which is, to be honest, not much less than that in pounds now, which is what I purchased it in. I think that represents good value for money. When I look at some of the Games Workshop kits for terrain, they would certainly, to get this much terrain, would certainly add up to a lot more than that in terms of actual cost of the product. But there's also a huge investment in time in sort of building, cleaning, and then painting them as well, which, to be honest with you, is just something that I can't ever see myself getting around to doing. So this works as a really, really great alternative to that as well. Of course, there are other sets of terrain out there that you can buy. So I've also got some sort of much cheaper laser cut MDF. In terms of why I think I'm preferring the pre-painted resin over that, it comes down to a couple of things. It's build quality. The MDF stuff is fine. Obviously, you tend to build it yourself. It comes sort of like flat packed and you build it. Again, as you start transporting, that bits do break off. So the sort of the classic sets that I've seen do snap, and I don't feel like I have that risk with these ones here. And also these ones, obviously being pre-painted, they require a lot less treatment. Sort of out of the box now, I could happily play a game on this table and it would look great. Whereas obviously you have those big brown MDF buildings, they don't quite look as good. Obviously these do cost a little bit more than the MDF terrain, so it's somewhere in the middle, I guess, in terms of cost of the MDF and sort of the higher end plastics, Games Workshop stuff. But I think it's a really nice happy medium in terms of sort of quality, cost, sturdy sort of build quality as well. And general aesthetics as well. And if, again, like me, you don't have the time or the inclination to build a whole and paint a whole set of terrain that fits an entire board, then this is perfect. Obviously, being on the new smaller mats now, I think it fills it out even better than maybe it would have in the past. So I don't feel like there is a need to supplement it with anything else, but again, you always can do. If you want to add a little bit more character or sort of a showpiece in the centre, I quite often like to use my Untitled crown in my games, just because it's sort of typically playing chaos, so just as a scenery piece rather than anything else. I think it can add a little bit of flavour as well. My final thoughts then is that I would highly recommend this product. So I know I said at the beginning that sort of with this we've been sort of partnered up with UrbanMatz to do this review, but I'm really glad actually. I think that had I purchased this independently of that, I would still be really happy with it. And to be honest, now that I've got a set, I'm kind of thinking why I didn't do it sooner, rather than having some haphazard battlefields. It goes without saying that we spend a fair bit of money on our models, both in terms of the kits, the time, the paint and everything that goes with it. But for some reason I'd always sort of neglected the nice terrain as well, because it just never felt like there was a good option for me. However, this set has sort of changed my mind a little bit on that now, and I think that it's a comparatively small cost in order to make sure we're getting the most out of our games. So for me, this is an absolute essential. I would highly recommend one of the sets of pre-painted terrain if you fit the circumstances I described. So I hope that helps, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Obviously, if you have any questions about the product that I can answer, then please do just sort of leave a comment, and I can do that for you. Or if you have any product specific questions, obviously you can go to the UrbanMatz website. There's a lot of information on there. If you have any questions that you think myself or anybody in the team here can help you with, just drop us a line. We're more than happy to get involved. But until next time, guys, that is the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe, like the video, and again, just get in touch with us. We love hearing from you guys. Any thoughts, just let us know. But until then, next time.